I'll just tug real quick on the word practice
Yeah.
and how we need spaces to be in practice with one another. So many of us are feeling so isolated and so disconnected that when we come together in these community groups, it is a practice in how to relate to one another. Like we don't have to agree with whatever everybody says, but we can hold space for that person. We can see that person as a human being. And I feel like I learned that initially in a 12-step group, adult children of alcoholics, is like trying to hold space with everybody, or sorry, trying to hold space for everybody, even if I don't agree with their perspective, even if I don't particularly even like that person. We need to find a way to come together because when disasters happen, when the next fire happens or flood, or if you can't afford your rent, your neighbors, your local community are going to be the ones that are near to you. And you might not like everybody, but you have to know how to work with them. You have to know how to get help from them and then offer help with them. And so I see our spaces in good grief, even though many of them are virtual right now, as the practice of learning how to be with other people again and moving through discomfort of maybe not liking somebody, maybe not approving of how somebody's showing up in that space, but still seeing the humanness in them. And as a culture, particularly here in the United States, we've really lost that. Like, how do you see the humanity behind the opinion or behind the political affiliation or behind this? You know, we've lost the ability to really bring out the authentic person behind the mask we wear.
Yeah.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And we're in our 10th year now, and 10th year of producing courses and offering online content. And I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember back in the day, we did in-person courses. That's where we're actually sitting in the same room. I don't know. That's how old I am. Um, and so it's exciting. It's exciting to be 10 years into this, and some parts of it are exciting in not so great way. This is a milestone that I wish I could say that there were far more encouraging elements that are here to be talked about. Perhaps our guest today could give us some. Just LaUra, out of what you've created in roughly the same amount of time that we both been involved with this, the production of our bodies of work and so on. LaUra Schmidt is here from Good Grief Network, and you know, I've followed you as someone who you have chosen such a powerful track for yourself. I know you and your partner Amy really are the founders and got it going on. And I'm sorry, I don't know what Amy's track has been. Yours has been far more visible for me. So please forgive me for just not knowing. But what I have tracked in what you've chosen to focus on, various kinds of schooling and particular tracks of professional uh, affiliation, uh, you have um, you have far more of a credible track going on than certainly I have chosen, and those have been very deliberate choices on my part. It's a very different atmosphere. It's a different audience often that I'm reaching out for. And we all know that we need all the flavors of what we can possibly offer to people in this, the most uh, challenging and existentially laden conversation in human history. So no judgment for anybody who isn't you or isn't me. We are all doing the best we can in this. And you've recently come out with extraordinary book, really beautiful. And perhaps you could tell us just a little bit about how that's going as a part of our conversation today. But before we got going, I gave you a little overview of what this particular year in living resilience is about, and at the really at the forefront of it is the 13-month program that I'm just launching this month. So it's going to go through September of next year with a special focus in all of our coursework and in a parallel expression here in the Poetry of Predicament podcast. We're going to be having interviews like this one we're doing today. And we're going to be doing panel discussions on special topics throughout these 13 months. And all of it has to do with having a focus on how have particular aspects of the human condition changed in just the recent past. And for me, that's very, very real. When we passed a couple of thresholds that I'm still quite disturbed by. I wish I could tell you that I've got it all good to go. I'm all self-regulated every day, and nothing disturbs me after so many years. No, I'm rattled. I'm rattled these days, and I'm doing this program for myself, perhaps more than anybody else, to find out what are the resources that people are calling on. People like yourself who have tremendous amount of resources, and you put yourself into intensive study and created this extraordinary body of work. So I know you've got some things to say, and soon I'll stop talking and we'll get to hear about what your responses might be. But as I mentioned, this is also a program for people from all walks of life. People who just range from they've just got a queasy feeling in their stomach that something's not right. For the first time in their life at this scale, they're wondering maybe there's some tear in the background fabric that I grew up with, knowing that it would always be there and it would always be better for this generation than the last and better in the next and so on. Of course, folks who are watching this podcast and know this body of work know that what I'm rattled about is that fabric is distinctly shredded and is not reparable that I can see. But I am not a terminal doomer in that. To me, that is no excuse for just throwing in the towel, to just say, F it, I'm done. I can't do anymore, or I don't want to do anymore. I'm going to go to Vegas and rack up the credit cards, whatever somebody's escape route might be. So I wanted to have these conversations. And so I really will stop talking now. And I just welcome you. Really, really great to talk with you. And I would love to know both how Good Grief Network is doing, what you're doing to adapt, if you're doing anything different, because you might not need to. You've got a very strong program going on. How are you adapting to these times? Do you also experience a threshold or a shift in the ambience, the ambient feeling tone, perhaps, of this world? And then how you doing personally? I think all of us in this line of work tend to get asked that quite a bit, like, how do you stay with it having this be the center of your expression and your body of work every day? It's a good question. I've been asked a lot, and I'm sure you have too. And I'd like to ask it again of you. How are you doing? How's it different for you? Life? How's life different for you? How's your work different? And um, and really just congratulations on the many steps that I've just breezed over in my introduction of you. Please fill in any gaps that I left in my introduction of you, which I'm sure there are many. And welcome. Really great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dean. I really appreciate the orientation for me and for everyone who will be tuning into this.
Yeah,
You have cast a very, very wide net. I'll, I'll latch on to one of the questions and then we can
sure.
go from there.
That's great.
Before we started recording, I named that I really appreciate the humanness you bring
Mm,
to these questions or to the introduction, like how am I? Um, it's a profound invitation into just being real, being two people having a conversation about the state of the world and how we orient to it. And
yeah.
something else I picked up in the threads of what you were saying is Amy and I, my partner, Amy Lewis Rowe, who is the co-founder of Good Grief Network, we often say we created the program we need. Like we needed spaces to
Me
talk
too.
about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see like a lack in what's being provided, and you're like, well, I guess I got to do it. I guess I got to try to do it. And so Good Grief is really, a baby of a deep desire to be authentic in a time when a lot of people want to turn away or shut it out or avoid. And of course, I use some of those mechanisms as well, but I do need a space to show up and say, like, I'm really scared about the state of the world, or, I'm feeling really hopeless. And I think that the culture has moved really forward, particularly since you and I first met. And we were trying to determine when that was in 2016, 17, 18, somewhere
Yeah.
around there. I feel like what is now kind of generally labeled as like climate grief or eco anxiety was very fringy, and I feel like it's been kind of moved along. It's people are having an understanding of this existential dread or fear more than when we first met. Um, but yeah, I think that because we don't have a really in-depth understanding of emotional intelligence. We don't have our emotional intelligence built as this culture. We also don't have a very strong distress tolerance. Like if something's hard, we kind of quit or we look away. We haven't learned how to really be in the tension with each other. And I think that as more and more people come to an understanding of this existential dread of eco anxiety, of climate grief, whatever we want to label it is, like this moment in time, we really have to build our emotional intelligence to be with it, to stay with it, and build that distress tolerance, to know that we can do hard things and we can lean in. And actually, by leaning in and staying with those hard things, a profound transformation happens. We're different people when we can be with our grief and be with our fear and be with our hopelessness instead of moving through it. And so, again, it's really important to have these coping mechanisms, these avoidance, distraction, and whatnot. But it's also important to come back to the thing that really scares you and look it in the face and like kind of submit and try to move through that. And it's, as you know, with the work that you're doing, we can't do that alone. We can't face these times alone. We need community support. And so in any way that we can start collectivizing to hold these big, scary emotions, to hold the state of the world, we're going to be better and stronger and more resilient as a result of that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So much overlap in what you've just said about especially your early days and motivations. Yes. I just came out of writing my own book back in and putting it out in 2017, and I said I got to create the resources and responses that I was hoping to find
Yep.
and be supported by.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hear you. That's great. And yes, it's interesting. We have such similar um, structures, if you will, like how, bringing people together, circle facilitation, and so on. We each have kind of an emphasis, a different emphasis, and perhaps a different time structure as people go through the progression in this body of work in living resilience. They start at the drop-in support group level, and if they choose to stay with it, it deepens and deepens until we get to the level where we might start to really do some of the deeper process work, including shadow work. And by definition, you cannot do shadow work entirely alone. It's because I have a blind spot where this shadow is. All right. So just to officially segue, we've just had a break in our connection, and now we're back. And I'll do my best to just very, very briefly say what I was saying, which is we seem to have different emphases in our bodies of work, and there's some, of course, similarities. Like people are sitting in virtual circles and perhaps in living circles or live face-to-face circles. And there are aspects of the work that really just demand, if we're going to be involved in it, that demands that we be with others and that we hold space for one another. And the example I brought up before I was so rudely eliminated from the virtual world is shadow work, which is one piece that our kind of advanced study group gets to. Is that by definition there are certain parts of shadow work that we just cannot do on our own. It involves a blind spot, a built-in blind spot that's innate or inherent in the definition of shadow work. So I just wanted to bring that up as one element of one type of work, one thread or one level of intensity or depth that can be available. And I think really more to your point, it's just part of what it is to be in community with one another. And there is no time in my recollection, and perhaps in human history, certainly at this scale, that we need a sincere, very close in definition of community. So yeah, I think you're right on track that your body of work and what you've structured and how it works out for your participants is to, if they so choose, they can really practice what it is to be space holders for one another, bring those skills back to their own families. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I hope you still are connected with whatever your thread might have been, or if you have a new one, please move forward. And if not, I'm happy to spark a question. So,
I'll just tug real quick on the word practice
yeah.
and how we need spaces to be in practice with one another. So many of us are feeling so isolated and so disconnected that when we come together in these community groups, it is a practice in how to relate to one another. Like we don't have to agree with whatever everybody says, but we can hold space for that person. We can see that person as a human being. And I feel like I learned that initially in a 12-step group, adult children of alcoholics, is like trying to hold space with everybody, or sorry, trying to hold space for everybody, even if I don't agree with their perspective, even if I don't particularly even like that person. We need to find a way to come together, because when disasters happen, when the next fire happens or flood, or if you can't afford your rent, your neighbors, your local community are going to be the ones that are near to you. And you might not like everybody, but you have to know how to work with them. You have to know how to get help from them and then offer help with them. And so I see our spaces in Good Grief, even though many of them are virtual right now, as the practice of learning how to be with other people again and moving through discomfort of maybe not liking somebody, maybe not approving of how somebody's showing up in that space, but still seeing the humanness in them. And as a culture, particularly here in the United States, we've really lost that. Like, how do you see the humanity behind the opinion or behind the political affiliation or behind this? You know, we've lost the ability to really bring out the authentic person behind the mask we wear.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's been particularly relevant here in Southern Oregon, where I live. I think it's 4 years ago now. Literally, believe it was this month, 4 years ago, that we had a fire storm that in less than 24 hours, 10,000 people were burned out of their homes,
Wow.
and many out of their businesses as well. And there's a small grief support agency, if you will, local to here in what's called the Rogue Valley, where I live. And we've had a special focus support, grief support group in kind of, I think it's roughly goes for 6 weeks or so, um, on the anniversary of that fire. And it was no small deal for people. When a fire comes, it doesn't it's not selective in what it burns out.
Yeah.
It's really total. So what you were saying is very relevant, and it happens to be very relevant to the politics of this area as well. Almost every neighborhood has a blend of far right, far left, whatever the different flavors are. So yeah,
Lost you.
I'm curious. Um, you've heard me speak a little bit about the thresholds that I've experienced of a shift, perhaps a bit more intensity, and certainly an acceleration of certain elements that seem to be essential to what I would say is this self-terminating global culture that we are in. Um, it's one thing if we've got this imaginary 2100, the year 2100, that's when the really bad stuff's going to happen, which is what I grew up with. I became
Mm.
collapse aware and actually collapse acceptant in my middle teenage years, which is a long time ago. And um, it was about 2010 that I got my cage rattled that it was not going to be 2100, that it was probably closer to 2050. And that was even in question when had that cage rattled. And since then, that's been moving its way back. And I've gotten pretty good at finding stellar, sober resources that I can count on to have triple checked, whatever it is that's motivating them to share the newest report. Um, so I'm really curious just how you see it in terms of if there's a timeline available to you or that's comfortable for you to use. Um, but more importantly, do you experience some shift either in your own self or in the folks that you work with or in the global culture at large at some scale? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? And is it shifting you? And is it shifting your work?
Yeah. Another giant question.
Yeah.
Um, where to start, where to enter into that. I think that I didn't understand the weight of what we were facing until my mid 20s in my graduate studies. I had known because I studied environmental studies and biology, and then I moved for a short time down to coastal Louisiana right after the BP oil spill. So I saw the extractive industry and basically what we what corporations do to people. I witnessed that firsthand, and that gave me a particular kind of like hopelessness that I'd been kind of shielded from where I grew up in rural Michigan. Um, yeah, I think that it's a terrifying time to be awake and aware because things seem to be happening faster. There's more fires, there's more floods, there's more storms, there's more droughts, like we've certainly altered the weather in a way that's terrifying. And if we're paying attention to the tipping points, the Amazon burning and the permafrost melting, if we're really in touch with that, then I think it really sends panic into our nervous systems.
Mhm.
And I, as a human, am not above that. And I think this is what we try to teach in Good Grief Network is eco anxiety or the state of the world awareness. You don't move through it and then it never comes back again, at least how I've experienced it. That terror comes back, that anxiety, that grief, the grief of knowing we can do things differently and seeing like the beautiful connections of humanity and the ingenuity of humanity and knowing we could live a different way and that we're living these really harmful cultural constructs that cause tremendous harm to people, particularly those most marginalized, but also the earth, all the beautiful animals that are being driven to extinction. I think those feelings, they come back time and time again. And part of our work is to learn how to accept them and to notice them and to move through them. And then for me, my work is to continue to say, well, if this is true, if climate breakdown, ecocide, overshoot is continuing, and then that's exacerbating more social breakdown, social animosity, and then they're reinforcing each other and building, then what's my role? My role is to minimize harm and to show up as fully as I can with an open heart.
Mhm.
I am so committed to love. There's a poem by Aisha Siddiqa that says, I'd follow love into extinction. And I'm drawn to this analogy that you used earlier in our talk about how the net has kind of been shredded, like it's not repairable. But if that net's not repairable, then what are we making in its place? Because I'm not of the understanding that humans will go extinct. I mean, eventually we all will. It's the part of natural laws and how we move through the world. But if we don't go extinct, there has to be pockets of humans who make it through. Can we not then be culture builders? Can we not be culture builders and help each other build new ways of being until we go extinct? Like what are we doing in place of the unraveling? There has to be a generation after the unraveling.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Really well said. I don't know how else to do it than what you just said. That's basically all I've been able to figure out as I don't want to say a stuck spot, but it's a spot that's a bit awkward. If there were such a thing as a cocktail party in the doomosphere, if I could put all the folks that I know that are, still doing almost daily YouTube channel doom scrolling reports and so on. And then lots of folks who aren't involved that way, but really consider themselves, part of the doomosphere and really kind of hold on tightly to the certainty of just how effed we are, and it's just all over, and it's so bad. Let me tell you how bad it is, with the newest report and so on. There's a there's kind of a progression. I'm sure you're familiar with a guy named Paul Chafurka and his stages of awareness. It's a really primitive, simple way to position oneself on a continuum of more or less systems awareness, from no systems awareness whatsoever, just disconnection and separation and so on, in the business as usual first stage of awareness. And then as with steps 1 through 4, I think he spells out, one gets the sense of, oh, there's more than one thing that just got my attention, like the fire that just came through this area or whatever it was. And it's more, so I have more than one thing to be attentive to that seems um, discordant or seems like it's not working right now. And then the next stage is to realize, oh, everybody's got more than one thing to be attentive to at this scale. So things are really not going okay. And yet we are interconnected. I'm actually interconnected with my neighbors and with this community and with this city and on and on. What I've seen in that I ended up concluding that there's an intensification and an acceleration going on. Um, I started speaking with people from all walks of life, not just people who are in this doomosphere, in the, very familiar with years and years of tracking the details and so on. There's something precious that came out of those conversations that I just wanted to continue. So I've got this 13-month program, and I'm really inviting people from again, all walks of life, to consider coming in and joining us in these conversations. And there is something so precious about it, and you characterize it as really a human, it humanized this extraordinary, mind-blowing circumstance we're all in. But I'm curious if there's more that you would like to say, either personally or with regard to your work in Good Grief Network, about are things somehow different? Are you doing anything different? Have you made different choices recently to adjust or adapt?
Yeah. I think what is a strong quality for Good Grief Network is that we're pretty adaptable.
Mm,
When we first started, we were all in person, and then we moved in person and digital before the pandemic. And right now, we're primarily stuck in the digital realm, although I want to figure out how to safely get back into meeting spaces in local communities.
hmm
And we train facilitators with hopes that we can empower them to take our program or an iteration of our program that works for their community and just be with the people in their local spaces
Yeah.
for the reasons we've already spoken about. And, just that connection, like who are you drinking tea with that can sit and hold that space? Like which nervous systems in real life, in offline, off the screen, are you connecting with? Those things really matter,
Yeah.
which I'm learning increasingly so as all my work's online, and I am like yearning for that in-person connection and community again. So Good Grief is now trying to get back into in-person offerings and do it in a way that, is safe and protects those most vulnerable for, um, you know, anyway, we're evolving, we're moving. And the thing that we're finding is that I think when we first started, near around the time that we met up, um, I I want something ongoing. I want something where we can just come regularly and drop into this authenticity, something analogous to a 12-step meeting. Obviously, very different subject, and we'd hold it differently. But how do we continue to come back to community so that, we can come back week after week after week and be held? I'm finding it really difficult to navigate heart-centered work in this capitalistic paradigm, because if I had it my way, I would create so many more meeting spaces. We'd know every Tuesday night we'd meet from this time to this time. And if you can't make it this Tuesday, you come next Tuesday, like how do you, for those of us trying to survive and have health insurance and have, rent payments and mortgage payments and car payments, how do you like I basically what I'm trying to articulate is heart-centered work shouldn't be profitable, or you shouldn't charge for it, and yet we're stuck in this paradigm of like you need to survive, and you very much like these space holders and content generators require money. And so I think that that's been an ongoing struggle for me as an anti-capitalist of like
Mhm.
I very much am deserving of healthcare and needs and those sorts of things. And yet all I want to do is create spaces that are accessible to everyone, that price point isn't an issue. And so we're constantly iterating and trying to be innovative, or maybe get grants to cover the bulk of our programming so that it can be low cost. But when it comes down to it, what I am incredibly interested in is the many ways that we can come together in a sharing space rather than a discussion space. Like
Yeah.
discussion is beautiful. What you and I are doing is beautiful. You respond to what I'm saying, it, sparks something in me, and then I respond to you. But also we've forgotten how to really just hold that space for each other. And
Mhm.
like, Dean, I can't fix you, like I
Mhm.
can't come into this, like, what if we just acknowledged that what we're facing is unfixable and see where we go from there? Like what new things could be thought of, created, practiced into being if we weren't trying to fix something that's unfixable.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of what good grief is this tension of like living in this capitalistic paradigm, trying to hold spaces that are accessible, trying to create ways, like we have a journaling program now, we have some workshops. But really, what I want is this ongoing space where we can keep coming back and building those connections and that safety and that place to generate ideas and inspiration. And then as for me, I feel like I am almost always in a process of dissolving and reconstituting and like dissolving and reconstituting. And my grandmother and my great aunt were in the Holocaust. And from a very young age, I was very like almost obsessed with reading books about the Holocaust and survival stories and resilient strategies that folks used. And I got the idea in my mind, being a person whose family has been directly impacted by genocide, that like we wouldn't let something like that happen again. And then you see worldwide that it is happening again. And so I feel like since the impacts of October 7th and what of last year, like the dissolving that has happened within me is realizing what we're up against is so much hate and othering, that to produce ecocide or genocide is an impact of collapse. I don't want it to be true that these situations will be ongoing and we're going to continue to other people. And I think this is why the heart-centered work that you're doing, that I'm doing, that other folks are doing is so
Mhm.
critical, is because we have to get to that shadow work. We have to get to the othering and learn that we're all deeply interconnected in order to make it out of this. And so the particular dissolving I was pointing to as I'm like monologuing about it is if I was under the illusion that like in advanced society such as ours, the state of the world would not produce more genocides, and we're seeing 3 or 4 active genocides happening now. Like, if that's true, then what? If that's true, then how do we make it so the amount of hate or fear in our own bodies and our own nervous systems aren't reproducing what's happening in the world at large? How do we prevent genocidal actions from taking place in our own families and communities? I think that's where I am with this dissolving and reconstituting. It's the
Right.
if this is true, if this is really happening right now, then what? Then what do I do and what's my role? How do I not perpetuate more harm in these times?
Yeah. Wow, that's gorgeous. I'm going to clip a number of your past 3 minutes in particular of what you've been sharing. That's as beautiful and concise and clear nutshell of what's going on, as I've heard. It was really, really gorgeous. Thank you so much. Yeah. Hmm. So that takes care of one of the major questions I had in mind for you, that I actually run by everyone that's in this series of interviews that's in parallel to this program, which is called Islands of Sanity in a Mad World. Um, I think what I'm sparked to share out of your gorgeous sharing is, I I've really been surprised, and I'm surprised that I'm surprised. I've been looking ahead to what likely would happen as things started to unravel. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job of predicting, or at least just scanning out and imagining. And turns out, phew, I had no clue.
Yeah.
I still have no clue.
Yeah.
I am surprised almost every day. And it's one thing to have the just the inarguability of the damage that's being done to our habitat, our one and only habitat. But what's particularly been shocking to me is the uh, human-caused collapse of human systems. Um, again, I have long been predicting resource wars and extraordinary cruelty as one dominant culture subsumes or annihilates another. And I mean, I think there's some of that coming. And so, Yahoo. Uh, but the ways that we appear to be acting out between here and there is is truly shocking. And I just love the way you talked about dissolving and then sorry, I've forgotten the word, that and then basically regrouping in a different form. I don't know what else we could be doing than there's kind of two parts of my work, or two pieces of jargon that I use to speak about the dynamics in my particular layout of this dynamic, and that is, we seem what's gotten us into this global predicament is that we've forfeited our center, both individual and collective center. Part of that is also the center that could be experienced in how we relate with one another, how we relate with the earth, and even how we relate with our own inner center. Um, there's something in your words and how you just laid that out in your way of speaking about it, that dissolving and then reforming in another um, adaptation, or another shape, to be more present in this new moment. I like to call that a liquid state. And it comes, hi there.
I lost you again.
And I'm curious, do you remember?
Yeah, yeah, I got it this time. You were talking about the loss of our center and then trying to bring in something that I said that resonated with your idea that we're losing our center.
Okay, good. Thank you. And for folks on the screen, we've had yet another big break where I disappeared. And so Yeah, to just pick up the last part of that thread, I was just first and foremost just loving how your summary of kind of condition of the world and the repeating cycles within it, it's is just gorgeous. And the last thing I would say is just that there's a similarity of dis that experience that you shared of dissolving and then reforming yourself into something, uh, some version of yourself that could be perhaps more present and more loving in in this new moment. That's what I was hearing. Not quite the same words, but that's what I was hearing. And I was wanting to just point out a kind of a similar concept, but one that I just call something different, which is a liquid state. And it's something that it seems like culturally we've been trained in all aspects of our life to um, avoid uncertainty. And uncertainty is the cultural way of saying we're dissolve, and then dissolving is not a good thing in our culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
to have uncertainty is not a good thing in business, and so on.
yeah,
And so, what I wanted to just mention was this liquid state notion that I use in my own practices, and that is to create an allyship with this otherwise horrific thing to be avoided at all cost. How about if it became one of our most powerful allies?
yeah,
And so that isn't to say that it isn't uncomfortable for me to dive into or lean into this liquid state. It's still uncomfortable as hell. I don't want to do it, but I do because I've done it enough now and I've been kind of
yeah,
mentored one way or another into this new way of relating with that. And so that liquidity is gorgeous. Offers me at least as much authentic possibility as it does the discomfort of having to let go of whatever was previous. So just wanted to mention that, and it just seems like we are in so many ways quite parallel in perhaps the body of work and maybe even in our own personal practices. And I'm not surprised about that. And I remember somewhere before the last time I broke away in the in the Zoomosphere. Um, yeah, I'm just going to breathe again because I can feel our time together for this interview is, coming to a close, and I want to let go of any fragments of things that I was trying to say before the time that I broke away in the Zoom call and so on. And just see if I can come up with a way to just breathe into kind of a completion of our time together. So I'm going to let go of any other fragments that I was hoping to remember and make some particular point. And as I do that, um, very strong um, impulse to just slow down a little bit and kind of lower my attention in my own experience. And what's there is to just once again really acknowledge you, LaUra and Amy, for what you've created and how, in my experience, it's an extraordinary challenge. It is, you haven't chosen an easy route, an easy path. And I know that well from my own parallel path. Yeah, I think all that's really important for me to say at this moment is thank you both and thank you to all the team that you've put together. perhaps thank you to all of the participants that have come
Yeah.
through your work as well. That when it really all comes down to it, I don't know of a more important thing to be doing than what we all are doing, but particularly what you all are doing in Good Grief Network of coming together to be more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors at a time a time of challenge and predicament that's never been seen before. This is the greatest challenge humanity has ever had to face. And you've positioned yourself right on the front lines of how do we be more and more human together when everything is in this culture is trying desperately to aggravate the situation. So there's a courage that I'm trying to make note of and speak to you about and acknowledge you for. Just a commitment to you mentioned it quite early on to love.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that there's anything more essential. I think it really just boils down to that. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being that.
Wow. Thank you, Dean. I really appreciate your words and we'll sit with them. And it feels really validating because, as you said, we didn't choose a particularly easy path. And the work has been so meaningful for me, and we've learned so much from our participants. And so you're right to name that. Like, they are teachers. Everyone who comes through our space is a teacher.
Hmm.
And I've learned profoundly from everyone that I've been able to sit with.
Hmm.
And before I wrap up on my end, I just wanted to bring it back to the notion of center. And I would love maybe sometime in the future to just talk about the loss of center, because through my framing, what I heard was a loss of soul. Like,
Hmm.
we're disconnected from the soul of ourselves, but also the soul of the world. And I think that's a lot what love does. And
Hmm.
like, it's a lot what slowing down does, is let us re-inhabit that soul. The soul is a place of connection. It's a place of love. It's a place of realizing that we don't actually want to harm each other, and to exist in this time and space we have to. And so how do we re-inhabit our own soul, the collective soul, the soul of the world,
Hmm.
in order to help us navigate this tearing of the fabric?
Wow. It's like you're reading right out of the notes for the Saturday sessions coming up in the September meeting of Islands of Sanity in a Mad World. Uncanny. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work, Dean. I really appreciate it.
All right. And off we go.
All right. Take great care.
Bye bye.